Hi, this is Mitch Maynard, the developer of Frameswork. Um, in the next few minutes, I just kind of want to walk through an introduction to Frameswork. At our website, there's a lot of information about how it was developed, why it was developed. But for here, I just want to kind of give a demonstration of some of the basic functionality that provides the developers uh, the ability to work within hopefully a more familiar construct than the other frameworks that are out there. So if I can, I've already downloaded the project from GitHub. So at GitHub, you're able to download. Here is the site. Gives kind of some information, but you can actually pull down the latest code. Then from within here, this is a C# MVC.NET Core project. And I want to kind of show you a little bit about what choices there are when you use Frameswork. The goal ultimately was to have a simplified user experience that can be applied to all applications. And you will notice that it is very similar to an operating system in the way in which that it works and how people will use it. If I can, though, there's 3 versions of the user interface: single view, multiple view, and then what I refer to as reactive view. So the single view experience is meant for a device, a phone, any of those kind of devices, where we want just a single view. So as you notice, when I clicked it, I launched it, and let's just say that I was to put in some information. This is all for the demo. You'll notice that it logged me in and came to a view. Now in this view, you'll notice that instead of there being menus and nav bars, for this type of an experience, there's shortcuts. So now when I come here, if I want to actually see and interact with functionality, you'll notice I clicked and I launched to a workflow. So if I was to just put in some information here and preview, you'll notice it goes to the next step, and it carried over information from the previous screen. And if I want to do things within the demo, there's the round trip to the web API that just occurred, and it enriched some data. When you look through the code, you'll notice that I provide demos for how to make round trips to the back end. And you'll experience method routing, which simplifies calling programming through a web API. It's a bigger discussion, but basically method routing reduces web APIs to one single controller and one single method, and uses a dependency injection format or design to pass in JSON objects that are parsed and routed to the appropriate programming method. So as you can see here, the experience seems pretty fast. And so then now if I actually want to go to the previous screen, I just click here, and then I click here. If I happen to go through and I want to actually go all the way back to the home screen, you'll notice there are these controls. So this feels a lot like a device. If I click here, I go right back to the home page. The other thing that what people you'll find to be different is that when I click and I'm using this, what people aren't really realizing is that this is for the demo purposes. The other form is right underneath it. So the way that I wrote this uses the Z index a lot to actually control what is in the view, but the other information is behind. So it helps to speed up the experience. Now, if I can, let me go back to a different view. So that's for our device. The other view is a multi-view, multiple view. So in this, you'll notice you have a start button, you have shortcuts. If I was to launch something, it'll open in its own form. You'll see the minimize bar at play. You can hide them, you can show them. This gives the ability to full screen, but let's just say that we want to reduce this and do our little just messing around, and then it's actually trying to talk to a database. So that gives you an illustration in the back end that it's trying to actually talk to a database, so that you'll be able to modify it in your own use cases. So if let's go ahead and take this work example, and I was to, if you think of it like a WinForm or a form from Ubuntu or Mac, you're actually going to be seeing a lot of similarities. So now if I was to bring this data in, the neat thing is with this view, we could actually go ahead and create a different user experience altogether. Because now we would have the ability to have multiples from a single origin. And then, of course, we're managing those. You can actually add launching from the start button. This is version 1, and in version 2 there's a number of updates that are coming, but there is the ability to search on which of the buttons. But for this version here, you're able to add very easily menu items here. So the user really, if you design this correctly, you'll have the shortcuts to the typical things that a user will do. And then if they want the complete array of what is available, they'll be able to go to the start button and then find what it is that they're looking to do. So let me take you to the reactive view. The reactive view, the reason that I call it that, and let me go ahead and kind of showcase, say this user login. Now what will happen is if for some reason there's a breakpoint responsiveness. If I was to reduce this, you'll notice that it switches from the multiple view to the device view. And then it'll head back. So even if I was to move this to this location and for some reason I was to reduce it and then bring it back, it's going to return back to its original placement. Within here, you'll see that one can have a number of different controls that are here. A big part of the design of this came from a frustration that I had about how people were able to get to the information that they needed to be able to see what they wanted to, what functionality they wanted to do. So I introduced this idea also. The other frustration was if I have a huge screen, I only have one view in a typical web application. So if I have all of these windows and I want to expand on something to learn more, say about this, I introduced this idea that there is the ability to launch another form, but to launch it in a different part of the screen. So here, if I want to learn about backend, I can click this button here and you'll notice it appears on the right. If I want to learn about something else and I want to see it in the middle. This way I can make the most of the screens that I have. And as you see, I have my minimize. If I want to just clear the whole thing, I can just shrink it. If I want to bring it back, I can bring it back, or I can find whichever one that I want to isolate. So that is the way in which that the UI is designed. Now let me dive in a little bit to the code. So basically, within Frameswork 1, we have a design principle. I'll go into the reactive view, and you'll see all the code within here. I have a concept called component pages. So in theory, this is a single page application when rendered by the user. However, in version 1, we have what I refer to as component pages. So component pages are meant to be lightweight, coded experiences for a dev to be able to create, rewrite. But basically what is happening is each one of these pages is rendered into one of those frames. That's why I call it Frameswork. So when you write a page and you click a shortcut that will launch a frame, then it will use an iframe container to pull this page into it. And so within here, you'll be able to see the code that is used to actually, launch and pass data between forms, talk to the back end. So what you'll see here is one of the keys to how the Frameswork interacts with the back end. When you make a call to the back end, you'll create an object, and the object, a JSON object, will actually give me the ability to, and these are not hardened schemas. This is whatever you need in the back end method that you're writing to support whatever action is on this frame. You'll just say, this is the method that I want this object to be routed to. And what you'll notice is it simplifies everything. We don't have to remember which controller. We don't have to remember, all the different things, the constructs that are hardened schemas. Basically, this is stringified and then passed to the method that you're writing on the back end. And so what will actually happen in this case, there's the use of an AJAX call that is on the base page, the index page. And you'll notice that this object is essentially sent to the single location where all interactions happen, to the API. So the post to server handles passing this, and then it does the transaction with the back end. So just to kind of give you an example, if we were to go in and we were to look at the controllers, you'll see that the primary controller is universal controller. And you'll notice there's the sample template, but this is the method that's always used. And basically what it'll do is you'll pass in as a string, stringified JSON. It will process the request, and that will actually, if I can jump down to there, go to the definition. You'll see that I'm passing in the payload, then I'm parsing it as a JSON object or a J object, then I'm reading the method, and then I use a small amount of reflection here that will actually take that method name, and call that method passing in that object. So when I get to enrich data, for example, so this is going to call our request processing. So within the programming, this keeps it nice and simple. All of the methods that you're going to call from the front end are contained within the request processing. From request processing, it's your own design. Do anything wherever you want. But what this does is it simplifies front end, create the controls, put them in a place that could be rendered inside a frame, and then create the JSON object that you're now going submit back to the API and route it to this method in the request processing. From there, it's whatever programming that you want. But the beauty is that when you're doing the work in the back end, you'll just stringify or serialize the response as a JSON object. So what that does is it keeps everything as a single object, as a string, since it can be stringified JSON or serialized JSON. So if I was to go through here and wanted to look at the enriched data, you'll see that here is the enriched data. And we've just passed in the J object. Now I'm parsing that J object. There is a library that I've included in this called JSON Mapper. And it's another presentation. But basically, it makes it very easy to parse JSON objects where it may be unclear as to where the location is for the node or the parent object and the child. So in this case, it's going to be looking for input field 1. And here it's looking for input field 2. So it's an interesting concept. I wrote it a number of years ago so that we actually have flexibility when we parse JSON objects that may be modified. And then you'll see that I'm essentially returning a key value pair. And then when it comes back to there, it's going to serialize. So it comes back with the signature of a dynamic, but it comes back as the key value pair that will then ultimately be serialized. So then when we're parsing it here, we're basically just going through and we're doing JSON parse to get the object, and then we're grabbing our values from it. That's how simple it is to do round trips to a web API. And the beauty of the web pages, as you may notice, is that they're very simple and focused. Here's our HTML that represents, we just program. And to be honest with you, I found a lot of frustration about all the rules associated with how you set up the CSS and how you set up your JavaScript and all of these things, these rules that people were creating. In this case here, why not, just like in a regular object, use the onClick event and call a method and parse the values and send it back to the API as an object that then gets routed directly to the programming that I need to execute. Now, of course, that programming that we're executing is kind of like a gateway, because it'll be that method that will then call and do whatever is left in your programming. There are some design principles that I've introduced here, but for now, this gives you kind of an idea of how easy it is to call a back end. One of the questions that you'd probably be having now is, what makes the frames? How does that all work? And so in our JavaScript, there is the ability to manipulate a collection of frames and to handle the creation of a frame. So interestingly, I have a concept called string theory. But what is interesting is this actually is a frame. It's just a string representation of HTML and a number of variables that are in the string interpolation. And so that's what renders. And so what happens in this is that this is essentially our routing that you might have in ASP.NET. So when you pass in to create a new frame, so in this here, there is this create a frame. So the frame object, it has an application, a title, and then whatever the values are that we're going to pass along. So when I create the frame object, which is on the index page, so you can reuse this from any of the pages that you might be creating, so there's high reusability here. What it will do is it will end up calling us back to the frame.js. So in this case, we're doing step underscore 1.1 or 1-1. So as you can see, I now, within here, it's routing it to this block, and then it's saying, hey, call this page, passing in these query string variables. So, and other things like React or other tools where they're using programming constructs, we're just staying with operating at the document object model. Pass in the query string variables, and in that page that you're calling, parse them. But you'll see that there's the ability, number of settings that will allow you to define the icon that's on the frame, the title, the size, so on and so forth. And so that is what will then be embedded within this representation of the frame as code. And then what is happening is that that frame will be injected into the body of the page. So this is kind of the heart of how we call our frames, how we create the frames. The method, if you notice, having the index allows us to have a simplified model for creating them. And within here, you'll notice I have a class or a JavaScript file that will allow us to find particular form or frames, to modify them, whatever it may be. But this is how we will manipulate the collection of frames that are on the page. You'll find this, if you've done WinForm programming, very reminiscent of window forms, because you have a collection of the forms within a multiple document interface. So I hope this helps to kind of explain how we came about this, or I did, sorry. And so the goal of this is let's let developers develop HTML the way it was designed. And then let's provide easy constructs to getting to our programming within the back end of a web API, so that we can simplify the process of development and focus on delivering a good experience, writing frames very quickly, the pages, and then being able to write back-end programming that can be executed and simplify the signatures. The neat thing about passing along JSON as a string is that we don't really have to worry about how we modify signatures of methods going forward. So there's a lot of things to this, but what I was really looking for was to create something, even if it's just an illustration of what's possible. Why not get back to the basics? So thank you very much for listening and watching. I appreciate it. Any questions, feel free to contact me.